my name is Lizzie, and this is Lizzie's Literary Life, and today we are doing my first Tipsy wrap-up of 2024. So, today I'm drinking Truly Margarita Style Mango Chili flavor. This is the first time I've bought this Margarita Style pack, and I do not like it. But this is the best flavor in there, so we're celebrating. I'm drinking all the other ones, even though I don't like them all very much at all. But for this video, we have something that I actually enjoy. And we are talking about my reading stats and all of the books that I read in January 2024. First wrap up of 2024. Let's just jump right in with the stats, for which I need to put my drink down because stats are serious business. I read 14 books in January, which was a total of 5,807 pages, for an average of 414 pages per book, which is actually really high. Like, I read long books this month. My average audiobook hours was 14 and a half. My average rating was a 3.35, which is fine. It's not great, but whatever. I read a lot of things, and that's what I like to do. The average length of time it took me to read each book was 7.3 days. I read an average of 187 pages per day, which is awesome. I'd like to have my yearly average of pages per day over 150. I did that in, I think, 2021 and 2022, and then 2023 went down, so I would like to get that back up again. I spent a total of 73.8 hours reading this month, for an average of 5.27 hours spent on each book, and an average pages per hour of 234.7, which is high, but that's brought up by a couple of very specific things, which we will get to in a minute. 93% of the books I read this month were in series, and 21% of them were rereads. So more than average in series for sure, and more than average rereads. As for genres, I read kind of a mix. I have a big chunk of fantasy, a chunk of romance, then mystery, thriller, sci-fi, one nonfiction, one classic. So pretty varied this month. As for age groups, we have actually way more young adult than I usually read. Just over half adult, and then with the rest, more young adult than middle grade, which is surprising, but again, you'll see what young adults I read. And then format, mostly audiobooks. That tracks because I was reading a lot, and when I read a lot, I tend to read a lot of audiobooks, and then even split ebook and physical. A new graph this year is where I acquired the books. We have majority 78% from the library, and then the rest from Everand, which used to be Scribd, that service, which I use a lot actually, like obviously, so library is like physical library and also Libby, and then Everand is the rest. I didn't read any books that I owned this month. As for ratings, a pretty even split, 3 stars, 3 3.5, 3 4 stars. Very symmetrical graph with a little outlier at 1.5 stars. That's what I'm teaching my stats class. Describe the distribution. We're going to get back in the middle and talk about the actual books that I read this month. The 14 books. Am I ready? I don't know. I gotta have a drink. I don't even like this flavor very much. They just taste really like artificial, very artificially sweet. I shouldn't have been tempted by them. Anyway, the first book that I read in January was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. I gave this a 4-star. I liked it less than the first book. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings. I'm buddy reading this with a bunch of friends, and I just was not as engaged in this one. A lot of my friends struggled to engage with Fitz as a kid in the first book, and I really enjoyed the stuff about Fitz as a kid. And this, I just couldn't engage as much. I don't really know why. There wasn't any specific faults. I just didn't quite engage with the story as much. It may have been like time and place of reading and just like way of reading, but I don't remember much about it. We're going to have our discussion and I'm going to be like, what actually happened in this book? But it was just fine. I mean, it was good. It was good. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a 100% lie. It was not just fine. It was good because these books are very good and Robin Hobb is a very good writer and this series is very intriguing to me overall. But for the series, which I've only read 2 of so far, but in relation to the first one, it was just fine. So 4-star, good, but I didn't engage with it. I didn't connect to it as much as I did the first one. But I still would highly recommend the series, and I, of course, am going to continue. I think this was a wrong place, wrong time situation for me. The second book that I read in January was European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss. This is the sequel to The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, which I read ages ago. I think I read it in maybe 2021. But this I gave a 3-star. This was a book I read in the first week of Squash That Series. So the reason I read 93% series this month, which is very abnormal for me, was because of Squash That Series, which is a readathon hosted by Bailey from Is Bailey Reading and Kayla from Kayla Ray Reads. This round is almost over by the time you see this and too late to join, but there will be more rounds in future. But I was reading a lot of series, and this was one I read during the 24 and 48 week, and I was listening to it. I did genuinely listen to it, but was I engaged? No. So I don't really know what I have to say about it because I just kind of listened to it to listen to it. And I did have a good time. I didn't have a bad time, but I had kind of a neutral time, 3 stars. Next, I read 9 Liars by Maureen Johnson. This is book 5 in the Truly Devious series. I gave this a 3.5 star. So the Truly Devious series was a solid trilogy. The trilogy, this is young adult. It was a solid trilogy, and then she added more books. And the 4th one was pretty good. It was kind of a standalone mystery. And then this one was it was a standalone mystery, but also interpersonal relationships within the kids, the teenagers that are in this story. They were really setting up for a longer series. So I think this is going to be a longer series. I like the characters. I thought the mystery was not very compelling in this one, and I thought the wrap-up was when you get to the end of a mystery and you find out who it is, and you're or who did it, and you're who even is that? This is a character that has been in here, but who even is that? And that's really disappointing in a mystery book, and maybe it's my fault for not paying close enough attention, but clearly that was not a relevant enough character for me to really feel connected to them. So 3.5 stars. It was fine. I will continue the series because I like these characters, but the mystery was just not doing it for me. And then I read A Perilous Undertaking by Deanna Raybourn. This is book 2 in the Veronica Speedwell series, which is a historical mystery series set in Victorian England about Veronica Speedwell, who is a lepidopterist who studies butterflies, and her not boyfriend, but they're gonna be Stoker, who is a natural historian and taxidermist. And they're solving mysteries together. There's a slow burn romance. I gave this 2.5 stars. I did not. This was another like listen to it in week 1 of Squash series. And I'm not going to continue with this series. I think I'm DNFing the series. Maybe I'll read one more book. But I don't find the mysteries very compelling. I don't love the characters the way everyone else does. And the slow burn romance is not intriguing to me because it's like, obviously they're going to get together eventually. So like, why do I have to wait until book 8 or whatever? Because this is a long series. Why do I have to wait so long for something that I already know is going to happen? Is kind of my feeling about it. I like the audiobook narrator. I think she does a good job. But I just don't love this series very much, and maybe I'll read one more, but I doubt I'll really finish the series because it's just not... I mean, it sounds like it would be for me. Historical mystery sounds like it would be for me, but it's just not. So, it is what it is. And then, why did I read this? I don't know. But I read Heaven and Earth by Nora Roberts, which is the sequel to Dance Upon the Air, which I read last year and hated. I gave the last one 1.5 star. I gave this one 1.5 star. This one I think was a little better than the first one. But really, this is like a fantasy romance series, but not fantasy romance in the way that we think about it now. It's like 2002 fantasy romance, where like it's a romance set in a small town where there's also witches. And this one, actually, this second book had a lot more of the magic stuff in it, which I think was a little bit better than the first one, but I still hated the romance. I hated the guy. This one was about Ripley, who is a side character in the first one. I just didn't like it, and I thought it was dumb, and the writing is just so early 2000s in not a good way. And I don't like the audiobook narrator, and I listened to it on audiobook again, knowing that I didn't like the audiobook narrator. Why did I do this to myself? I have no idea. I don't even have like big ranty things to say about it because it was just kind of generically bad. Yeah, moving on. And then I read Disney in Shadow by Ridley Pearson, which is book 3 in the Kingdom Keepers series. This was my favorite Kingdom Keepers book thus far, even though it was hella long. It was way too long. This was 3 stars. The Kingdom Keepers books are about they're Martine from Just Martine's childhood favorite series, which is kind of why I started reading them. But I love Disney, so I thought they would be fun, and I love middle grade. It's a middle grade series about these kids who basically work in the Disney parks, but they work as holograms, so they like recorded themselves. It's very early 2000s technology. They're holograms in the park, and then at night they cross over and exist in their holograms while they're sleeping, and they solve mysteries or there's like evil doing going on. And this one was fun. I feel like we really got to know the characters a lot more. There were too many action sequences. Like, it didn't need to be as long as it was at all because there were so many of these running around the park action sequences that I was like, we don't need this many of them. We can have one at the climax. We don't need this many of them. But it was fun. These books are fun. There's definitely like lines that you're like, oh my God, this was written by a white man in the early 2000s. This one's 2010, I guess. But the first one was like 2005. And still, it's 2010. But they're fun. That's all I can say. It's fun to see them running around the parks and having adventures, and because it's set in Disney World, obviously, in Florida. And Martine like grew up around the parks and going to the parks, so like that's obviously so special for them. In reading these books as a kid, and I didn't have that experience, but I still love reading them. I say love, and I gave it 3 stars, but like, it's kind of it's a qualified love. I'm going to continue the series. I'm going to continue enjoying them, but they're not that good. Moving on. I read A Close and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This was 4.5 stars. I really liked this book. It could have been a 5, except that, I don't know, I'm just being picky. This is the sequel to A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but it's kind of a companion. It doesn't follow all the same characters. You could read it without having read the first one, though I think it's best to read them in order. This is about Lovelace or Sidra. So Lovelace, I feel like it spoils the first one, so I'm not going to tell you. But it's about Lovey, and who renames herself Sidra, and Pepper and their adventures, and you get Pepper's backstory, which is really awesome. This is a sci-fi. The first book is kind of a space opera, like traveling through space, having adventures, and then this one's very much more grounded in just a couple characters from the first book, and how they are examining what it means to be human and what it means to be a person. And there's a lot about AI in this book, and AIs that are people, and where that line is. And I thought that was really interesting, and I loved getting Pepper's backstory. I just found it very intriguing, very interesting, really enjoyed it. And then I read Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery. This is a reread. The sequel to Anne of Green Gables, which I read just a couple months ago, I think. Reread a couple months ago, last month maybe. This I gave 4 stars. This is not my favorite book in the series. It covers the time after, like, when Anne is living in Avonlea as a teacher before she goes to college. And it's fun. There's a couple fun new characters, but you don't have the, like, charm of Anne as a kid, and you also don't have the, like, you're still in the same setting, so it's not as, like, interesting as some of the later books. I don't know, but I do love this series, and I still really enjoyed this one. I like Davy and Dora. I like John Irving, I think is his name. Paul Irving, whoever the kid is. I like the kids that are in this book. And we get some nice character development with Marilla. But not my favorite book in the series overall. I've been filming a long time, and I still have a lot to get through. Next, I read Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake. This was another 4.5 star. This is the 3rd book in the Bright Falls trilogy, which starts with Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which I gave a 5 star in 2022. I loved it. It was one of my favorite books of the year. Iris Kelly, Astrid Parker, which is the 2nd book, I did not like as much. But Iris Kelly went back up there for me. I did really, really like this book. Again, not a 5 star, but honestly just because I'm picky. This is about Iris Kelly, who is a side character in the first couple books, who she doesn't date. She, like, just hooks up with people. She doesn't want, but she's a romance writer, and she's, like, kind of has writer's block. And then there's this other character, Stevie, who is just got out of kind of a long-term relationship and her ex is her friend and is dating her other friend, and she, like, kind of wants to, like, loosen up and have some experiences, but also let her friends know that it's okay that they're dating, I guess, kind of. And Iris and Stevie end up fake dating after a hookup gone wrong. And there's also this huge theater element in it, which was super fun. They're putting on, is it 12th Night or Much Ado About Nothing? I really associate those two in my head because I did those two the same summer, so I can't remember which one's which. The one with Beatrice and Benedict. I think that's Much Ado. Anyway, they're putting on that Shakespeare play, and they are having a grand old time and having a romance, and it was fun. I liked it a lot. And then I read Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This is the new Heartstopper. This is a young adult graphic novel series that everyone knows about. This is the new one. I gave this 3 stars. This was probably my least favorite of the series so far, just because it's a story that I can't really relate to as much. Like, even, obviously they're in high school. It's not a story I can relate to anymore, but, like, at least in the previous books, it was like, this was what my high school experience was like. It just was not didn't connect with me personally as much as some of the other stories did. But I enjoyed it. It was fine. I read these so fast. I don't have like a ton to say about them, but I do enjoy Nick and Charlie, and I will read the last one when it comes out. And Alice Oseman is an excellent writer and creator of graphic novels, so highly recommend them to any young queer teen especially. And then, because I squashed that series, because Heartstopper Volume 5 wouldn't count for points on its own, I had to read another volume. So I read Heartstopper Volume 1, which was a reread. And I gave this one 3.5 stars. I think I initially gave it 4, and it was 3.5 on reread. This one is fun. This one's maybe my favorite in the series, just because you see them meeting and falling in love, and it's super just like cute and fun and fluffy, and I think it's just a really fun story, but I don't have much to say about it. It was a reread. And then, smashing through it, I reread Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. So this I read it's a young adult series, middle grade series. I put it as middle grade on my spreadsheet actually, but it could be young adult. I don't know. Young adult, middle grade, children's-ish series that I read when I was a teenager or a preteen, about this home for peculiar children, kids who have magical abilities, and it's like stuck in a time loop, and you have this kid whose grandfather went to that school and dies, and then the grandson is trying to find out about his grandfather, and he ends up in this time loop with the peculiar children. I guess, I don't know if some of that's a spoiler. I don't know what's in the synopsis, but it's been out a long time, so I think it's okay. I gave this 3.5 stars. I think this is as like those young adult middle grade series that I read when I was a teen go. This is a really good one. I think this was a very solid start to a series. I think there was a lot of exposition. Like, we didn't really get into what's really going on until like halfway through, which is why some of what I said in the synopsis may be a spoiler, because we don't get to it until a little bit in, but I also feel like you need that information to know what it's about. So I think the beginning was maybe kind of slow, getting to where we get to, and then the end was a little rushed, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed my reread, and I want to continue the series. I'm rereading it so that I can finish the series, because I only read, I think, 3 when I was younger, and there's like 6 out. So yeah. What I love about this book, and I loved this when I was a kid and read it too, is that there's photographs of the peculiar children. They're like vintage photographs, and they're real vintage photographs, which I think was really cool. And there's like credits in the back of where he got each of these, like from collectors, these actual vintage photographs. And I think those really enhance the story. So, but I also found on this reread, I found that he also does a really good job of describing them. So if you're listening to the audiobook, or if you're especially if you're a visually impaired reader, the photographs are not like, it's not like a graphic novel where it's essential to the story, but they do really enhance the story. So, and the atmosphere. So I thought that was really good. And I actually saw one of my students reading the sequel just the other day, and I was like, oh, I just read that book. And then the only standalone I read this month was Girls and Their Monsters by Audrey Claire Farley. This is a nonfiction, and this year I'm doing Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon challenge, where like every month there's like a buzzword or like a word that you have to find in the title of a book, and read that for the challenge. And I'm doing it with my friend Ruby from Ruby Red. We are doing Buzzwordathon, but all nonfiction. So nonfiction every month using the buzzwords, which I think is a great way to get me to read more nonfiction, which I always want to do. And the buzzword for January was the 3 theirs, there, and there. And this book, Girls and Their Monsters, is about the Janane quadruplets. I think the subtitle is The Janane Quadruplets and the Making of Madness in America. These quadruplets were born, I don't want to give you false information, but it's like they grew up in like the 60s, 70s, I think. And they are quadruplets, 4 girls, and they were all diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so they were this huge study by NIMH in nature versus nurture, like what of psychosis can be attributed to genetics, because obviously we have these quadruplets who are all schizophrenic. But you learn that like they also were all raised in the same household, and they were raised in not a great household. So it kind of was like there was a lot of really awful details about how they were raised. But also what I found great about this book, what I found really interesting, and I gave this 4 stars, was the history of psychiatry that it posed, because psychiatry is such a new field, and it's something that's very involved in my life, so it's really interesting. And we have just like all of these developments in the trends of where psychiatry is going towards medication, towards nature versus nurture, towards whatever. Like I found that really, really interesting, and how these girls' specific story played into that history of psychiatry. So that's what I found interesting about this. It wasn't perfect. I think the narrative flow was not perfect, but I did learn a lot, and I enjoyed my reading experience. And the final book that I read in January of 2024 was Authority by Jeff Vandermeer. This is the sequel to Annihilation. And Annihilation I read last year, and I gave it a 3-star, I think. This I gave a 2.5 star. Not because these are bad, but because I think I waited way too long before reading the sequel, and there was so much that I didn't remember from the first one. So many details that I was supposed to pick up on stuff, and I think I didn't. And I just didn't like the characters and the plot in this one as much as I did in the previous one. The first book, this is a sci-fi. We're set in a world where there's this Area X, which is like a part of the country, part of the world that is closed off by a border from everyone else, and they periodically send, because of some contamination or whatever, and they periodically send expeditions into Area X for like scientific expeditions. And in the first book we follow one of these expeditions, and then in the second book we follow the aftermath and the scientists that are studying that expedition. And I just didn't remember enough of what happened from the first book to really appreciate the second book, I think. And I also didn't like the characters in the second book as much, or like the narrative arc. So this was just okay. I probably will, it's a trilogy, so I'm sure I'll probably finish the trilogy, but not a favorite, though I've heard the movie of the first book is really good, so I would like to watch that at some point. And those are all the books that I read in January of 2024. Yeah, so those were the 14 books that I read in January. It was a good reading month for me. Squash That Series definitely influenced my reading a lot and made it a good reading month for me, but I appreciate that very, very much. And let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, or did you read a lot of sequels this month? And if so, what was your favorite? My favorite book this month was probably A Close and Common Orbit. That and Iris Kelly Doesn't Date were the 2 4.5 stars, but I think I liked A Close and Common Orbit better. So that was my favorite book of the month. Let me know what your favorite book of the month was down below. Give me a like and a subscribe, and I will see you in the next one coming very soon. Bye.